Hello and welcome to this episode of the Academic Papers Podcast, where we celebrate academia and bring education to everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into digital history. Down Under, to be specific. We'll be taking a look at this thought-provoking article from Digital History. It's by Mike Jones and Alana Piper, and it really digs into the current state of the field in Australia and New Zealand.
It really does. It's fascinating how they kind of present this picture of a field that's simultaneously flourishing, but also facing some significant challenges.
Yeah.
They highlight this kind of boom in digital history in the early 2000s, but then point to a potential slowdown in recent years.
Yeah, it's almost like a what now moment. Like we kind of figured out how to digitize archives,
Yeah.
but now we need to figure out like what's the next step. And the article mentions some pretty serious things like funding woes, aging technology, and even Trove almost collapsing as like signs of this uncertainty.
Yeah. Those are some serious warning signs. And it makes you think about the long-term sustainability of some of these projects. Like, it raises these questions about whether we've become too reliant on a few big platforms, like
Oh,
Trove, for example, which is an absolutely incredible resource, by the way.
absolutely. I've spent countless hours just getting lost in Trove. It's
Yeah.
amazing what you can find there. But the article is spot on when it says we can't limit digital history to just digitized archives.
Yeah, exactly. It can't just be about access. It has to also be about analysis. The article emphasizes the potential of computational methods to unlock new insights from these huge amounts of data. Think of it like this. Imagine a massive jigsaw puzzle, but all the pieces are mixed up. Well, computational methods are what can help you sort through the pieces, find the patterns, and assemble the bigger picture in ways that just wouldn't have been possible before.
I like that analogy a lot. Makes me think about all the big unanswered questions in history and how these methods might be able to help us address them. But the article doesn't just focus on the challenges, it also highlights some real wins, like DigitalNZ. Apparently, it's a global leader when it comes to organizing and connecting information from all these different sources.
Oh, absolutely. Digital NZ is a great example of how these platforms can really create this interconnected web of historical knowledge. And of course, there's Trove as well, which, despite its recent struggles, is still an unparalleled resource for anyone interested in Australian history.
Yeah, and the article gives some cool examples of how researchers are using Trove's data in some really innovative ways, like the Prosecution Project, which is building a whole database on criminal justice history using Trove, or Catherine Bode's work on analyzing 19th century Australian fiction.
Those are really neat examples, and they just give you a glimpse into the vast possibilities of digital history. But what's also fascinating is how the unique geography of Australia and New Zealand has really shaped how digital history has developed there.
You mean the tyranny of distance they talk about? It's almost ironic how these vast distances, which were once a barrier to historical research, have now become a driving force behind digital tools being adopted.
Exactly. Think about the Australian Joint Copying Project, which started way back in 1945. That was essentially an early attempt to solve this very problem. It involved copying and sharing historical documents between institutions that were separated by huge distances. It was basically a pre-digital precursor to the large-scale digital archives that we have today.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come. And with such a strong public interest in family and local history in both countries, it's not surprising that platforms like Trove, DigitalNZ, and Papers Past have been so popular. It's almost like everyone has suddenly become an amateur historian.
I think you're right. Digital history has absolutely democratized access to the past in a way that we've never seen before. It's put the tools of historical research right into the hands of everyday people. It's allowed them to connect with their own histories in ways that are much more personal and meaningful.
That's a really great point. I think it's so important to remember that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's something that lives within all of us.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about how digital tools have opened up all these new avenues for historical research. Like, the article talks about this shift towards more quantitative methods in history, which was pretty rare before digitization made it so much easier to work with large data sets.
Right? It's like history is finally catching up to some of these other fields that have been using data analysis for years. And the article specifically mentions criminal justice history as an area where this is really taking off.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, with all these digitized court records and other legal documents, researchers can study patterns and trends in criminal justice in ways that just weren't possible before. It's like they're using data to hold a mirror up to the past and
Yeah.
reveal all these hidden injustices or systemic biases that might have otherwise gone unnoticed.
It's kind of like using data to tell a story, but a story that's backed up by evidence and analysis. And speaking of stories, the article also mentions this thing called distant reading, which sounds super sci-fi to me.
Ha, yeah, it does sound a little futuristic, but it's actually a pretty fascinating way to analyze huge amounts of text. Like, imagine you wanted to understand how language use has evolved over the past century. You could, of course, read tons of books and articles. But with distant reading, you can use computational tools to analyze all those texts at once and identify patterns and trends that you might not be able to see just by reading them.
It's like having a superpowered magnifying glass
Mm.
that can zoom in on all the little nuances of language and reveal hidden meanings. But the article does caution against relying too heavily on these methods, right?
Right. They're careful to emphasize the importance of balancing distant reading with traditional close reading. It's like having a conversation with the past. You need to listen closely to what the sources are saying, but you also need to step back and consider the broader context.
So it's about finding that right balance between the micro and the macro, the details and the bigger picture. And it seems like the article makes a similar point about big data.
Absolutely. Big data can be incredibly valuable, but it's not a magic solution. We have to remember that even the largest data sets are shaped by the biases of whoever collected them. It's like looking at the past through a particular lens. The lens might be really powerful, but it's still filtering what we see.
So even with all these amazing new tools, historians still need to be critical thinkers, carefully evaluating their sources, and understanding the limitations of their methods. It's a good reminder that digital history is still at its core history.
Exactly. The tools might have changed, but the fundamental principles of historical research haven't. We still need to be rigorous, skeptical, and open to new perspectives. The article actually touches on this interesting tension between the traditional culture of secrecy in historical research and this increasing push towards openness and transparency in the digital age.
It's like historians are trying to figure out how to adapt their practices to this new world, a world of open data and online collaboration. I can understand why some historians might be a little hesitant to share their research notes or the raw data. It's like asking a chef to reveal their secret recipe before the dish is even cooked.
I get that. But the article makes a pretty strong case for why this kind of secrecy is actually putting historical research at risk. As technology changes, old file formats and media types become obsolete, and that can make it impossible to access the research that was done on them. It's like having a library full of books written in a language that nobody can read anymore.
So it's not just about sharing the finished product, the book or the article. It's about preserving the entire research process so that future generations of historians can build on it. It's about creating this kind of living archive of historical knowledge.
That's a great way to put it. And in this age of misinformation and fabricated content, transparency in historical research is more important than ever. By being open about their sources and their methods, historians can help ensure that their work is based on solid evidence and that it can stand up to scrutiny.
It's about building trust and accountability. And it's also about acknowledging that knowledge is something we all share. The more we share, the more we all benefit.
Absolutely. And then the article shifts gears a bit. To talk about how digital history and public history intersect, they argue that this is where digital tools are really having the biggest impact. It's about bringing history to life for a wider audience, using these digital platforms to tell stories, to engage with communities, and to spark conversations about the past.
It's like digital history is breaking out of the academic world and into the public square. And the article highlights some really cool examples of this, like the Find and Connect resource, which helps people who were institutionalized as children trace their family histories, and the Massacre Map, which has brought to light the truly horrific scale of colonial violence in Australia.
Yeah, those are incredibly powerful examples of how digital history can give voice to those who have been silenced in the past, and how it can challenge the traditional narratives that we have about history. They're using technology to empower people, to help heal old wounds, and to build bridges of understanding.
It's almost like digital history is becoming a force for social justice and reconciliation. And it's not just about serious topics either. The article also talks about things like historical computer games and digital walking tours as ways to create these really immersive and engaging historical experiences.
It is fascinating to see how technology is blurring the lines between history and entertainment, and even tourism. It's creating all these new ways for people to connect with the past on a much more personal and emotional level.
Yeah, it's like history is becoming more accessible and engaging than ever before, which has to be a good thing.
Oh, definitely. It's all about making history relevant to people's lives. And these digital tools are giving us all sorts of new ways to do that. But the article also raises some concerns about how we're teaching digital history, particularly when it comes to training new historians.
Yeah, they point out that while some universities are incorporating digital methods into their history courses, there's still no clear path for students to really develop these skills.
It's a tough situation. Historians are being asked to use all these digital tools, but they're not always given the training and support they need to do it well.
Right, it's like we're giving students this amazing toolbox full of shiny new tools, but we're not giving them the instruction manual. And the article makes a strong argument that this is a problem we need to solve if we want digital history to really thrive in the long term.
I agree. We need to invest in the future of the field, both by supporting the digital historians we already have and by training the next generation.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the people who use it and the institutions that support them. It's so inspiring to hear about everything digital history can do. But it sounds like there are some pretty big hurdles, too. Does the article give any specific examples of where those challenges have caused setbacks?
They do mention a few, and some of them are a little worrying, like the near collapse of Trove back in early 2023.
Oh, wow. That must have been a shock for the Australian digital history community.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. I mean, Trove is this world-renowned resource used by literally millions of people for research, for education, just for exploring. And to think it almost went offline because of funding issues, it's a pretty stark reminder that even the most successful projects can be vulnerable.
It definitely shows how important it is to have those sustainable funding models, ones that aren't just based on short-term grants. And the article also brings up outdated technology as another big risk.
Oh, absolutely. So many of these digital history platforms are running on these aging systems, and they're getting harder and more expensive to maintain. It's like trying to run a cutting-edge research project on a computer from the 90s. It's just not going to work long term.
And the longer you put it off, the greater the risk of losing data or having it corrupted. It's like a kind of digital decay, where the information we're trying to save could just fade away if we don't take care of it.
That's a really good way to think about it. It's not even just about losing access to the platforms themselves. It's about the potential loss of all that valuable historical data, which would be a huge setback for everyone in the field.
It would be devastating. And didn't the article also mention some digital history projects and institutions actually shutting down because they weren't getting enough recognition from within the historical profession?
Yeah, it seems like there's still some skepticism, maybe even some resistance to digital history in parts of academia, which makes it harder to get funding, to publish in the top journals, even to get students interested in the field.
It's a tough cycle to break. If digital history isn't seen as legitimate or valuable, it's less likely to get the support it needs to succeed.
Exactly. And ultimately, that limits our ability to learn from the past. We need a more inclusive approach, one that values both traditional and digital methods, and encourages collaboration between the two.
So where do we go from here? How do we make sure digital history has a strong future?
The article has a bunch of recommendations, but they all boil down to a few key ideas: collaboration, investment, and a change in how we think about the field.
Okay, let's break those down.
So with collaboration, it's all about breaking down those walls between different disciplines, getting historians, archivists, librarians, technologists, and even the public all working together.
I like that. It makes sense. We all have a shared interest in preserving and understanding the past, and we can accomplish so much more if we work as a team.
Exactly. And when they talk about investment, it's not just about money. It's about putting in the time, the energy, and the expertise to build a solid digital infrastructure, to train the next generation of digital historians, and to show people just how valuable digital scholarship really is.
You have to see digital history as a core part of the field, not just a fad or a side project.
Exactly. And finally, there's this need for a change in mindset, both within the historical profession and in the wider world. We need to move past this idea that digital history is somehow less than real history and embrace the variety of methods and approaches it offers.
Digital tools aren't meant to replace traditional historical skills. They're meant to enhance them, to give us new ways to ask questions, explore sources, and connect with the past in a more dynamic way.
Exactly. And the authors really believe that making that shift in how we think about the field is crucial. If we want digital history to reach its full potential, they imagine a future where digital and traditional history work together to give us a richer and more nuanced understanding of the past.
I'm definitely excited about that. And if any of our listeners are thinking about a career in history or something similar, I highly recommend checking out academicjobs.com.
It's a great resource. You can find all sorts of higher education job postings there, and maybe even get a chance to help shape the future of historical research.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into digital history, I'm left with a sense of hope, but also a sense of responsibility. Hope for all the incredible things digital tools can do to help us understand the past, and responsibility to make sure we make that happen through collaboration, through investment, and by being open to new ways of thinking and working.
It's a good reminder that we don't just study history, we create it. And the choices we make today will determine how future generations see and connect with the past.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little inspiring. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the past alive.